Yeah.
Awesome. Okay.
Hopefully people turn up.
Well, there's already 6 people in the room.
Oh, cool.
You can see Caesar is one of them, which is fantastic.
Which one? Caesar, okay. Because it was scheduled for last week and Mani said she had only 9 registered. And I felt it's better to reschedule and go for more.
Easter is a terrible time for most people. It's a week and a lot of people away. So we're still a few minutes ahead of time, and we've got people still coming in, so I'll just leave it a little bit longer.
Cool.
Line. Hello to you too, Caesar. And Steve Butler says hello to Nalayini.
Oh, okay. How come? Can I see it in the chat?
You have a chat function if you want to click on the chat icon down the bottom there. So for those of you that are with us, we're just going to wait a little bit longer because we did have quite a few more people register. So we'll just give them a minute to see if they can enter our little webinar world. Still growing as we speak.
From Norfolk Island, that's interesting. Can I be back in a minute?
Of course.
Just put the heating on. So when I look at the chat, can you see that as well on the screen or not?
No, we can do that later. We'll use the Q&A function for questions as we go through. But I think, where are we now? I think that's 1 minute past. We might start if we can. So welcome to everyone that is out there in the virtual world. I am not Marty Ogg, as the screen suggests that I'm looking at. I am actually Linda Bannister. I'm on the board of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance. I am based down in Hobart, Tasmania. So the first thing I would like to do is just acknowledge and pay respect to the Tasmanian Aboriginal people as the traditional owners and continued custodians of the land on which I sit today, and acknowledge the elders past and present. For those of you that aren't familiar with ADSA in the past, or if this is one of your first times attending a webinar, we are a fantastic organisation. That's basically all you need to know. The Australasian Dark Sky Alliance is all about bringing together, I guess, a diverse range of sectors and people from different backgrounds, because essentially that is what the issue of dark skies is all about. It's a collaborative approach that will solve the problem. And one of our main goals as an organisation is to educate public policymakers about night sky conservation, and we couldn't have a better speaker tonight to do that in Nalayini. And I'm going to just introduce you, and I have to say that aside from being a fantastic person, Nalayini, we're going to go through a few little lists that I've written down here, if I may. So Nalayini holds a master's degree of science in astronomy, as well as in finance, as well as being a qualified chartered accountant, just as a side. She is a member of the Auckland Astronomical Society, current chairperson of Astro NZ, current vice president of the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand, on the board of directors of the International Dark Sky Association, is also on the board of directors of the Australasian Dark Sky Alliance, and was instrumental in establishing the Great Barrier Island as an IDA accredited sanctuary, and is basically one of the key figures in New Zealand's journey of becoming a dark sky nation. So, Nalayini, tell me if I've got this right, but that basically means it's the AAS, the RANSNZ, the IDA, and the ADSA. Is that correct?
Sort of, yeah.
An acronym. So I think we can take a couple of things away from that, but the most importantly is that you're a very busy woman, and so really do appreciate you joining us tonight. Very appreciative of the time that you're giving up to do this. We are recording this session. I will say again, if we can please use the Q&A function you'll find at the bottom of your screen for questions as we go through. But with that said, thank you, Nalayini, and I hand over to you.
Thanks, Landon, and welcome everyone. Today's talk is about New Zealand's natural night skies. ADSA covers both Australia and New Zealand. It's an Australasian entity, but a lot of the work ADSA does is in Australia. And this talk is to introduce what's going on in New Zealand through this webinar. So I will just summarize where New Zealand is at with its dark sky movement, where it's come from and where it's going. So let's start with the global dark sky sort of status. This is a groundbreaking piece of work done by Fabio Falchi and his colleagues. It's called the New World Atlas. Many of you will be familiar with it. And it was published in 2016. And this is what got me into dark skies. It was quite a striking sort of finding. And if you look at the map, you'll see that light pollution is a developed world problem. You have that in North America, you have it in Europe and in Japan, and some more affluent countries, economically more advanced you are, the more light polluted one seems to get. But what's interesting is Australia and New Zealand are two of the darkest, or the two darkest countries in the developed world. And if I go further and look at Australia and New Zealand separately, let me say that these maps are not to scale. You'll realize, or I realize, that Australia has a very much more land area that's dark compared to New Zealand. And the reason for that is Australia is 29 times larger than New Zealand. And even though the population is 5 times more, the density of population in Australia is only 18%. So Australia is much darker, New Zealand is less dark, but these are the two dark sort of countries in the developed world. And as I like to say, when I sort of show this comparison, the big difference is no one goes to these places in Australia. We'll see from the next slide, New Zealand has still abundant dark skies. That's Auckland, our capital, where a third of the population lives, Wellington, Christchurch, Hamilton, Dunedin, these are the cities. But if you look at the measurement of sky quality, 74% of the North Island has got either pristine dark skies or slightly degraded near the horizon, which really doesn't affect the view overhead. When it comes to the South Island, it's 93%. So these are very significant percentages of dark skies, dark night skies. And as I said earlier, virtually every part of New Zealand is accessible quite easily. So that's a major difference between Australia and New Zealand. The other factor that is pretty significant is Milky Way visibility. Globally, Milky Way is now invisible to a third of humanity. So the people who see the Milky Way are living in less developed countries. And in the developed world, Milky Way is disappearing as something you see easily. 40% of the Europeans and 20% of North Americans don't get to see it. If you compare that to New Zealand, you can see the Milky Way from 96.5% of the land area. People don't necessarily live in those areas, but largely almost all parts of New Zealand, you can see the Milky Way from, except for the heart of the cities. And 53%, more than half of it, are pristine night skies. And what's really interesting is, if you are prepared to drive half an hour from just about anywhere in New Zealand, including Auckland Central Business District, one can get to see the Milky Way. And that's quite important because people's knowledge of, I mean, that's really what got me into dark skies, because when I saw that 2016 study, I was quite shocked, because for me, seeing the Milky Way from my holiday home is a regular feature. I mean, I just, not only the Milky Way, the Magellanic Clouds, and then to think that a third of humanity can no longer see it was a bit shocking. Night skies, natural night skies or dark skies are very congruent with New Zealand values and priorities. It preserves the history of New Zealand. It's the last landmass to be populated. And the Polynesians who arrived here had to come through with using celestial navigation, which is naked eye navigation. They sailed day and night. So the night skies played a very critical role to their migration. And Captain Cook, even though he had a few instruments to help him, the night skies was equally important for his navigational purposes. So the history of New Zealand, the discovery by the Polynesians and Captain Cook put it on the map, and in some ways, some kind of a rediscovery. Both of them are linked to using the night sky for navigation. The cultural practices in New Zealand, the Maori cultural practices integrate the night sky through Matariki. That is, we'll talk about it later. That's a Maori New Year, which is based on an astronomical sort of event. And Maramataka, which is practices linked to the phases of the moon. And these are daily ongoing practices. They were a little bit suppressed during the early period of colonization, but there's a massive resurgence and they're thriving. So that's important to our culture. Protection of the environment. New Zealanders are very environmentally conscious. So biodiversity, nocturnal, coastal, migratory birds, these are important to us. And contribution to the economy. Now, this can't be understated, because tourism is the #1 contributor to exports in New Zealand. 20.1% of total exports come from tourism. That's, a fifth of the total exports. It's 6.3% of GDP, and 11.3% of total employed are in the tourism sector. So it's a major sector, and the astrotourism contributes to tourism. So these are very significant factors in New Zealand, which are linked to, it's very congruent with natural night skies. So that's the context in which we need to look at dark sky protection. So having dark skies is one thing, but protecting the dark skies is another thing. Because if you don't protect it, it'll get degraded and future generations won't have the benefit of that. So that's what dark sky movement in New Zealand is all about. It's about protecting what we have got for our future generations. And in New Zealand, dark sky protection commenced in the Mackenzie district. Mount John Observatory is situated there. It's New Zealand's #1 observatory, and it remains so. And in the 1980s, lighting ordinances were put in place to protect the work that was being carried out there. That was a scientific observatory mainly run by the University of Canterbury. So International Dark Sky Association was formed in 2001. Whereas lighting ordinances to protect the observatory preceded it by more than 20 years. And in 2004, Dark Sky Project, this is New Zealand's leading astrotourism business. And according to the CEO of International Dark Sky Association, its probably, not probably, it is the leading astrotourism business in the world because it's very successful. And that started on a very small basis in 2004 because the natural night skies were appreciated by one of the partners. He comes from Japan. So he realized the value of the natural night skies, which New Zealanders took for granted. So that led to forming a little astrotourism business, international visitors coming along. And that was the start of realization that these skies are a special treasure and they are worth protecting. And they worked alongside University of Canterbury and Mount John Observatory people and some leading astronomers in New Zealand who were committed to not eradicating is the wrong word, to diminishing the impact of light pollution. And one of them is with us today, Steve Butler. His involvement in light pollution predates the accreditation of Mackenzie. And John Henshaw, Professor John Henshaw, he was the director of Mount John Observatory. These are the two people who are still leading the dark sky movement in New Zealand. And they were involved in protecting New Zealand's dark sky before New Zealand got its first accreditation from Ida. They were involved in the application process. So in 2012, Auraki Mackenzie was accredited as an international dark sky reserve by the International Dark Sky Association. They are the fourth of 20 reserves, and they are the 18th to be accredited out of nearly 200 places now. So they were fairly early in the piece, and that was a big achievement for New Zealand. And then that one thing led to another. So by 2000, basically Tekapo was a little village. People transited through that when they traveled from, say, Kaikoura to Christchurch. But after this accreditation and the astrotourism business and opportunities, they got fantastic night skies there. If anyone wants to enjoy New Zealand night skies, that's a place to go to. And it has grown to such an extent that they had 900,000 guest nights in 2019. This just predated the pandemic, which was double that of what they experienced in 2014. The town itself has become really prosperous. It's busy. There's been a lot of development. A number of astrotourism businesses have launched at various levels and innovative. Dark Sky Project itself has put in place a $10 million center so that they can use that as their flagship place from which to do the astrotourism work. So this is really thriving and is a fantastic example of successful astrotourism. And they say that 10% of the 1.5 million tourists that come there are drawn to the dark skies. And there are flights that come from China. It's like a destination tourism place. So flights come from China straight in there to enjoy the night skies because it's such a treasure for them. So this has been a great example. And it also has modeled what dark sky tourism is to New Zealanders. And it is consistently, even to this day, it ranks as one of the top places to go stargazing in the world. If there's a top 3, Tekapo will be there. If there's a top 5, Tekapo will be there. And this is Airbnb's top global top 15. So it continues to rank up there and the experiences are good. And so dark skies actually coexist with astrotourism. Dark skies movement is a conservation initiative to preserve and protect our natural night skies, whereas astrotourism utilizes these natural resources to have sustainable, environmentally sensitive tourism. It embraces cultural tourism. There are various Maori astronomical traditions, And it also benefits diversified stakeholders. Most of the places that have astrotourism are not in urban centers. It's a regional economy, and it is a sort of a leveler of economic development. So the beauty of this is this combination of being able to protect your night skies and also benefit economically from it is very attractive combination to politicians and regulators. They find that very attractive when we go advocating. So just to summarize, there's a high level of awareness of natural night skies in New Zealand. There's easy access to natural night skies. There's a continuation of cultural practices, the success of Tekapo, economic growth from astrotourism, re-emergence of Polynesian navigation as a historic and cultural learning tool. This happened with the Hawaiians I think in 1974, rebuilding the old canoes and sailing all the way to Papeete in Tahiti very successfully without any instruments and just through naked eye celestial navigation. And in 1985, one of those vessels visited New Zealand, and then New Zealand got onto it, and they have been sailing to Easter Island and Hawaii and what have you. So Polynesian navigation is now built into cultural learning, and there's a waka, which is a Maori boat that goes around the country. So that's also re-emerging. And then a general realization that relative to the global dark sky standing, New Zealand's night skies are actually of a high quality. So that's a realization. What we took for granted, now there is an overt recognition of that. And while all this is going on, there's been lots of scientific studies coming out now showing the adverse impact of light, artificial light, on biodiversity and human health. So that's strengthening the case. It's not just the night sky from an astronomical or a cultural point of view, but it's also, environmentally critical for biodiversity and human health itself. So dark sky advocacy in New Zealand is initially it was led by astronomers. It was the same with Ida. Ida was founded by 2 astronomers. And I believe the reason for it is astronomers are the only people who look up at the night sky almost on a daily basis. They're looking up to see whether they can observe this or scientifically do something or whatever. So they become very aware of any degradation before the general population does. So as a result, and also their work or their enjoyment is curtailed. So they have been leading the charge with dark skies. However, that's changing. It's changing at Ida, it's changing in New Zealand, and it's changing globally. It's now becoming a multidisciplinary teams because there are lots of places in New Zealand who are pursuing dark skies because they are concerned about the impact on shorebirds or migratory species, or that's becoming quite a significant driver rather than for astronomical benefits, which is sort of not widely shared. It's also being advocated both top-down, organizations like the Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand, doing some sort of broad brush lobbying with the government or dealing with the national organizations, but mostly from grassroots. It's people who live in dark sky areas suddenly saying, hey, I went to Tekapo, it was dark, but so is my little patch. And so that's it's essentially driven by the grassroots residents. That's the driving force in New Zealand. These are all volunteers. There isn't a lot of money that's spent, small donations perhaps. And it's that people energy that's driving the dark sky movement in New Zealand. Once there is some level of momentum, once they have done the measurement or they've got enough support, and the local government agencies are becoming increasingly supportive. When they realize that with a little more effort, they can get it accredited. Basically, to get dark sky accreditation, you need three things. Your night sky needs to be dark. And that's the starting point, because it should be worth protecting. The second thing is people living under those dark skies should want to protect it. So there should be support for protection. And the reason for it is if they don't support it, it cannot be sustained. People have to control the outdoor lighting or be dark sky friendly. So that's the second thing. And the third criteria is controlling the light for the future. That the protection is for future generations, for the coming years. And unless there is legislation, legally valid protection like lighting ordinances, the risk of the dark skies getting degraded are quite high. And that is the challenge in getting a place accredited. The first two are fairly easy because a dark sky place, you know it's a dark sky. If you can see the Milky Way in New Zealand, if you can see the Magellanic Clouds, you're starting with a dark sky place. So there was a time when I used to go and measure the dark sky for places. Now I ask them on the phone, can you see the Milky Way? Yes. Can you see the Magellanic Clouds? Can you see Lambda Orionis? I know 4 or 5 things I'd ask. And if the answer is yes, I say, well, if you want to, I can come and measure it for you, but I can tell you here and now it's dark. And is there support locally? If the answer is yes, then you've got to just go up to your local authority and get the lighting ordinances sorted out. And that's where the challenge is, that's where the difficulty is. But increasingly, the agencies in New Zealand realizing that this is not so challenging, or they're prepared to make the rule changes for the benefits or the retrofitting. That's the other thing. If there are lighting that are completely in breach, then it needs to be retrofitted, and there's an economic cost to it. And it's all a matter of balancing the benefits with the cost, taking a slightly strategic view, and increasingly there's a lot of support from local agencies in New Zealand for this. So dark sky protection has been gathering momentum in New Zealand over the years. Auraki Mackenzie was accredited in 2012. For a very long time, it was felt in New Zealand that getting dark sky accreditation was a very tough thing, because for Auraki Mackenzie, there was Mount John Observatory, New Zealand's premier observatory. University of Canterbury was involved. There was a government minister, Margaret Austin was championing it, and a very high caliber team worked on it for 2 or 3 years, put together a very substantive piece of work as the application. So it was seen as something beyond the scope of other places. But in 2017, Ida Great Barrier Island, which is only 30 minutes from Auckland by plane, a flight, and Auckland being the most light polluted and the most populated city in New Zealand, hosting a little more than 1/3 of the population, they got accredited. The thing with Great Barrier Island was that they don't actually have reticulated lighting. They don't have street lights. So the lighting part was easy. You had to talk to the residents and control outdoor lighting, but it wasn't difficult. It was dark and the population was very much behind it. So it was a relatively simple piece of work. The application for Ida Great Barrier Island was quite a simple piece of work. Just measure the island top to bottom, show that it's really dark, show that there was people in Ida didn't actually, they sort of saw the beautiful night sky, but they had no understanding of, it was when you have so many stars in the sky, it's very difficult to recognize the constellation. So we worked with them and improved their appreciation of the dark skies. And the local board, they could have gone for provisional accreditation. They said, no, let's go for the full accreditation. And the challenge was to get Auckland Council to approve, because to be legally binding, the approval had to come from Auckland Council. But once that happened, I think there was a growing recognition around New Zealand that this can be done in other places too. And I was told by John Barentine at Ida that there was a big uptick in inquiries and applications and desire to accredit from New Zealand. And we've had two other places accredited so far. One is Stewart Island, which is quite similar to Aotea. It's at the southern end of New Zealand, and YET, which is the top of the North Island, top of the South Island. In addition to that, two cities have had accredited as 3K cities, which is 3,000 Kelvin lights. In New Zealand, the standard has been 4,000 Kelvin lights, and there's a massive subsidy if you take those lights on to each of the regions. So as we shifted to LEDs, it's been mostly 4,000 Kelvin lights. But in some places, they have been replaced, like Wairarapa, they have had some of their lights replaced to qualify to become a dark sky place. And Waiheke, Auckland Transport replaced all the lights to 3,000 Kelvin at their cost to facilitate this. So there is increasing support for this. And so just to quickly show the outcomes of accreditation, in tourism or economic development in Auraki Mackenzie has grown by 15% per annum regularly, repeatedly since 2012. Aotea Great Barrier Island experienced 16% growth in that next season following accreditation. In Rakiura, Stewart Island, it was 17%. YET, unfortunately, got accredited just before the pandemic, so they haven't really had the benefit of it. And these two cities that are working to accreditation, Wairarapa is working to a dark sky reserve accreditation, NASB's dark sky community. They already have astrotourism. They are behaving like as if they have been accredited by Ida. There's a lot of resident support, there's outreach, they're controlling the light, and they're both, funnily enough, they're both very close to getting accreditation, and the remaining step has all to do with lighting ordinances. So that's where New Zealand is at. But this is the realization I had. Let me see, I can't see the...
Sorry, Nalayini, that's halfway there for you.
Can you see this? Okay. So this, when I attended a conference in Galloway, I realized that UK, look at this light pollution map. It's terribly light polluted compared to New Zealand. We are the same size geographically, about roughly 250,000 square kilometers. And Britain is terribly light polluted compared to New Zealand. But they have 17 international dark sky places, and New Zealand's got only 4. So this came as a big revelation for me as to the potential of New Zealand. If Britain can find these little pockets where they can get accredited, surely we can do better than that. So that was the motivation for me to look at a wider picture. So in conjunction with people like Professor John Hernshaw and Steve Butler and other people, we've sort of considered, why don't New Zealand consider a dark sky nation designation rather than, just do the places. So this has been an interesting journey for us. And what we are looking for is an overarching New Zealand-wide designation. Potentially, we could become the first dark sky nation, even though Pitcairn and Niue, two little Pacific islands, both of which have been accredited with the help of New Zealanders, are countries, they're tiny countries, tiny Pacific countries. And the way this has been discussed in principle with Ida a couple of years ago, when John Barentine was the policy director. So the idea is that IDSP, dark sky places designations, continue as before. So they're not mutually exclusive. However, dark sky places accreditation is based on activities, which is you pass the lighting ordinance, you get residents involved in dark skies. You measure the dark sky quality. Whereas dark sky nation, we are looking at results-based designation, which is the fraction of the country's land area that is legally under legal protection for dark skies. What percentage of the country is protected? And also to stabilize the growth rate of the national light emissions. So these are the type of broad brush measurable results that shows we are adequately protected. And in New Zealand, given our cultural importance of night skies and biodiversity, it's a worthy conservation sort of goal. So this is very quickly the difference between dark sky place and dark sky nation. The motivation for dark sky place designation is commitment to conservation, preserving the history and culture, astrotourism, and economic development. Whereas a dark sky nation designation looks to strengthen the IDSP goals to help the places to get accredited. So you support that. We magnify the benefits from each. For example, a dark sky place can actually do everything by the book. But if a neighboring location is getting light polluted, it can be adversely affected. But if you go as a nation towards dark sky protection, then you're protected that way. And then increase the collaboration between IDSPs. Instead of each of them working separately, they work as a group and achieve a greater proportion of dark sky protection and reduce light emissions. So if I can just step out of that to look at light emissions, this is before you adjust for transient lights like wildfires in Australia, and this is after adjustment. So if you look at these charts, New Zealand is yellow before and after adjustment. Australia is change is quite rapid, but after adjusting for transient event, it becomes better, but it's still quite sort of more emissions coming from there. In New Zealand, the emissions are about 1%. Globally, it's about 2%. So, and the global population is growing at 1%. So we are doing better compared to the rest of the world. And again, if you look at light emission chart, that's the global levels, and New Zealand levels are below that. So we are doing pretty well. So artificially lit outdoor area is about 2.2%. In New Zealand, it's increasing at 2.2%. In New Zealand, there's no change. Total radiance is increasing at 1.8%. New Zealand is 1%. So relatively speaking, our light emissions are good, but we are looking to improve that. This is a very quick chart comparing it to some other countries like Australia, UK, Germany, and the US. New Zealand is still doing well. Germany is doing good, but we are doing better than most countries, or better than even Germany. So land area under dark sky protection, this is a very interesting number. Let me move this again. This is quite shocking, really, because after these 4 dark sky place accreditation, it's still only 2.4% of the total land area of New Zealand that's under protection. Quite a small fraction. Internationally, the percentage is very small, 0.1%. The area that's better protected, much better protected, is Wales. It's not a country, even though they claim to be one. It's a principality. They have protected 17.6% of their land area. And the reason for it is it's got the same population as New Zealand, and there are a lot of national parks and the like, and just by protecting the major national parks, they were able to get to that percentage quite quickly. My husband happens to be Welsh. We actually have a home in Wales, and that's in one of those dark sky places, Brecon Beacons. And even though they are protected and all of that, they are not as dark as the New Zealand dark skies, but they are protected dark skies, even though they may be only 80% as good, whereas New Zealand is largely unprotected still. So what has happened over the years is these are all the areas of interest in dark skies. In 2020, at the start of 2020, which is the start of the pandemic, and at the end of 2019, we had a Starlight Conference in New Zealand. And at that time, we had 17 places interested and pursuing dark sky protection. If I may pause here and discuss two things. One is the role of Auraki Mackenzie. Auraki Mackenzie being the first to be accredited and most advanced in its understanding of dark sky protection, provided a good case study on what to do, how to do, what success can look like, and what the problems can be. Too many visitors, and they've had some environmental issues from being too successful. So one of their interest in supporting other places is to slightly reduce the pressure on them in having to handle all the visitors. But they have provided a very leading role in supporting other dark sky places. And this Starlight Conference, the idea was to sort of pursue a dark sky nation concept, but it was actually hosted by Auraki Mackenzie International Dark Sky Reserve. The other thing I wanted to discuss is why Ida Accreditation. There are some countries, even in the UK, even though they have 17 internet Ida dark sky places, they have some other local places of distinction, or they've got some other thing going on in the UK, which I became aware of at the conference. And Canada does its own accreditation. Some of them do their own sort of accreditation. But New Zealand has bought into the International Dark Sky Accreditation, partly because of the legacy. Auraki Mackenzie was given it, and others have followed that. But the other reason is our resources are limited. If we have to set the standards, if we have to provide the tools, if we have to manage the criteria, keep upgrading it, we just don't have those resources. And also the international accreditation is respected as an independent, objective accreditation. And it has made it easy for us to lobby with the local government or for lighting ordinances. You just say, when I have been in so many meetings where they say, do we have to do this? And all we say is, that's the level we have to meet. That's the criteria we need to meet. So I spent a lot of time talking to Auckland Transport over Waiheke Island, and eventually they caved in and went and replaced all the lights at their cost. So that was a very big gesture on their part. It took a couple of years, but the argument was, do we have to do it? We've just replaced them with 4,000 Kelvin lights. But we just say that's the standard, otherwise we'll never get accredited. Look at these dark skies, they're worth protecting. So it's helped our cause to have an independent arbitrator of this criteria. So New Zealand's pursued that, and all these places are independently pursuing. We are supporting each other, but they all pursue their journey directly with Ida. We have had the International Dark Sky seniors, the chief executive and the two officers who were then doing the dark sky accreditation visit New Zealand. And on one visit, we encourage the person to travel right around the country to visit all the dark sky places. And as I said earlier, New Zealand is accessible, places are accessible. On the second occasion, we invited the CEO and the Dark Sky Places director to attend the Starlight Conference, and we organized little clinics for each of these people who are pursuing dark skies to meet with the person directly. And all of that has helped both ways. One is the locations become aware of where to emphasize and what the procedures are, and Ida becomes aware of how dark these places are and their motivation level. So that's helped the cause. This is just to show the, here again, you see the Mackenzie district's impact. They had a mayoral forum in June 2019, and they invited 16 other district CEOs and mayors. So the mayor of Mackenzie district is promoting the benefits of dark skies, sharing best practices. They had people from Auraki Mackenzie present a paper, etc. And that has had its own impact. The mayor of Wairarapa was at this mayoral meeting, went back motivated to do something about it. And as I said earlier, the Starlight Conference, there were 14 dark sky places participated in that. This is a chart I put in to show the blue pins are all the astronomical societies in New Zealand. There are about 18 societies like Auckland Astronomical Society, Dunedin Astronomical Society, Whangarei Astronomical Society, Southland Astronomical Society, and they're all located right around the country. And the yellow pins are the dark sky places, aspiring dark sky places. And what happens is these societies support those people in their own way. They support them with outreach, they support them with dark sky measurements, which can be a little bit technical. So that's also helped the movement to the extent, even if it's driven by an environmental group, they get the benefit of someone coming in, measuring the night sky quality. The biggest polluter in the night sky is the moon. So when you measure dark sky, you got to know, you got to avoid it. You choose a moonless night. That doesn't have to be new moon. It can be, if you're an astronomer, you know when the moon is out and whatever. So it's helped. So that has been another factor that has contributed to moving the thing along. So at the Dark Sky Starlight Conference, we had a workshop of these 14 people attending, and some broad decisions came out. One was to establish a network of New Zealand dark sky places. The other was to support each other by sharing best practices, expertise, and resources. And the third one was to work together and lobby the central government. So these are very broad brush, but there was general agreement to work together and support, and there was strength in numbers. But the conference was in September 2019, towards the end of that. And before we could get our act together, the pandemic was dominating everything. But earlier this year in February, we managed to launch a website. That's the website called Dark Sky Network New Zealand. It's basically a collection of resources. It's to make life easy, because at the end of the day, Ida is a US-based organization. There are time differences, and they have 200 dark sky places in 22 countries. And, lighting ordinances has to be custom done for each country. In New Zealand, even each location might need a customization. So that was a big bridge. Even though we accepted IDA standards are good, they provide good resources, they provide support, independent objective, there were barriers, the distance and the some cultural barriers, etc. And the places that have got accredited had various lessons learned, good and bad lessons, which they are able to and willing to very generously to share. And we also can work off an ordinance that's already customized for New Zealand to be customized a little further, then start with the US-based or UK-based ordinance. So there's a lot to be gained for us networking. In that time, the aspiring dark sky places and the 4 accredited places had grown from 17 to 23 and still growing. So this was what was set up. It's nothing too complicated. There's a frequently asked questions and answers. There are resources, and people, some experienced people are available to answer questions. But parallelly, a Facebook page was set up. It was a private Facebook page. So only, I think each aspiring or established place was given 3 people from them could join. And that's a very informal, casual chatting place where people can talk to each other. If there are some events, they can tell about it. If they found something good, photographs, whatever. It's relatively early days. I wouldn't call it a very established network as yet, but it's going in the right direction. Most people have signed up. Facebook is becoming active, and some people are more motivated than others. Some people have more time. It's a volunteer-run thing, and each place is going at its own pace. But it has triggered some, it's sort of triggered some action. One of the questions that was asked of me was, what's this dark sky nation? What percentage of areas do you want to be accredited? And my answer was, we haven't set a target as such, but Wales has got 17.6%. So the Otago group got very excited. It's led by a scientist who is retired. So he did some calculations and said, Otago accounts for 11 to 12% of New Zealand's land area. If I think it's viable to do 50% to 1/3 to half of the area, so we can contribute 3 to 5% to the national effort. Now, this is a newly set up group. They have formed a subgroup. They're very motivated. There's lots going on, and they're supporting each other, neighboring areas. So that's been a success story that's come out of setting up the Dark Sky Network. And there are a few other developments as well. So this is working, and it's the New Zealand way. People go at their pace. They offer help. Some people take help, but it's been really, really well received. So what are the short-term goals? There's only a small group. This came out of the workshop. Increase the number of locations designated at IDSPs. If we have 4 accredited places and 19 aspiring places, then we need to convert them into accredited places. 2 of them are pretty well advanced, and there are another 3 or 4 which are well on their way, and the pandemic had slowed down things. So that's sort of, so we support the ones who are almost there and get them over the line collectively. Increase the percentage of New Zealand's land area under formal legal protection for dark skies. Lobby local land management agencies to adopt conservation best practices regarding outdoor lighting, and generally increase public awareness at all levels, from schools to adults. So that's just short-term stuff done regionally and collectively. We are also planning to run a series of webinars, bringing in different best practices within New Zealand, and also bringing in people from Ida to explain, exactly how should the lighting inventory be done or whatever. Because some of these, when someone explains, it's a lot easier than reading the requirements on their website. So that's all in the pipeline. What are the long-term goals? I mean, these are some loose long-term goals I've just put together. So ideally, what we'd like is for the central government to pass some outdoor lighting legislation, something that passed at a national level and picked up right across the country. We had an opportunity recently with there were some changes to the New Zealand Resource Management Act, and Royal Astronomical Society of New Zealand has made a submission to consider certain sort of broad brush rules for outdoor lighting. And it was supported by a number of aspiring dark sky places, astronomical societies, right across New Zealand. So it has strength rather than 1 or 2 people submitting. So some of them submitted individually as well as collectively. So, the outcome is yet awaited. It might be small movements, but we are moving in the right direction. And the long-term goal would be light pollution education as part of the national school curriculum. This is something I'm really interested in. And ADSA had a scheme in Australia, which I did try to bring it into New Zealand, but we wanted to do it through the Ministry of Education. And once again, the timing wasn't right, and we can resurrect that. And that will be really ideal if we can get it into the curriculum. And the final thing is promoting all of New Zealand as a dark sky tourism destination. And we have talked about it to have a sort of a national dark sky passport or dark sky trail. At the moment, we have only 4 places, but growing. So this is something we could implement at short notice, because dark sky places are interested in doing something like this. So there are, apart from what the individual locations are advocating and moving forward, there are some good national level initiatives that have taken place, contributed to by, as I said, top-down people like Razans, also grassroots, and sometimes people get there independently. So the Royal Society published a paper on blue light. That was a Razans initiative. The Ministry of Environment study on air pollution. I just quickly show the next few slides, show what's happened. So this is the blue light paper that was published by the Royal Society and promoted to a wider group. And that's a paper Ministry of Environment published. It was called Our Air. I mean, we didn't get a separate light pollution, but at least we got a nice write-up acknowledgement in that paper. They acknowledge light pollution is important. It's important to Maori practices, scientific values, health of native species and ecosystems. So there is growing acknowledgement in New Zealand that this is something that is recognized and something needs to be done. New Zealand Statistics actually did a deal directly with Fabio Falchi, and those statistics are on the New Zealand Stats website. And they have acknowledged that artificial brightness can affect, wildlife, biodiversity, and people's health. They have specified people's mental health. And New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement also recognizes this. So that's they are not prescribing what to do and what not to do, but there's acknowledgement. And the Society of Maori Astronomy Research Traditions. And this is going to be quite an important thing. We'll talk about it a bit later. So another example of a national benefit with us working as a group is there's been so much lobbying going on with the New Zealand Transport Agency. They have actually changed their rules to say consideration may be given to the use of 3000 Kelvin warm white nominal CCT in areas of special environmental consideration. And they have mentioned such as dark sky reserves. So this is quite a improvement for us. It happened a couple of years ago because different areas have been lobbying for this. They finally said, rather than approve each of them separately, there was some discretion given for dark sky reserves. What are the benefits of becoming a dark sky nation? Protect the night skies as a whole, and impact of, we talked about this before, neighboring places. National awareness is increased, preservation of culture and history, attractiveness of New Zealand as a tourist destination, but most importantly, to preserve the night skies for the future generations, because New Zealand skies are dark enough, we can continue to enjoy them in our lifetime, but if we don't protect them now, then future generations won't have the benefit of it. And this is a unique, New Zealand declared Matariki, which is the Maori New Year, as a public holiday starting this year. So this year on the 24th of June, it'll be a public holiday, and it'll be so for the coming years. This is a pretty unique thing, because Matariki is when Pleiades, it's an open cluster of stars, rises after it's disappeared for the winter, and as we get close to the winter solstice, you can see Pleiades in the dawn sky, pre-dawn sky. This is a very distinct cluster, a celestial object. Normally you see only one star. This is a group of stars. It's the only open cluster that can be seen with the naked eye. So it's got a long history of being observed from prehistoric times, but in the Polynesian culture, that is when they recognize that winter is coming to an end, spring is starting, the sun's sort of starting to go high up in the sky, and there are various traditions associated with that. So it's founded in culture, but it's actually an astronomical awareness by the Maori, and it's the sighting of Pleiades is the important thing. So the Maori Matariki was a little bit suppressed during the colonial sort of times, but it's increasingly become popular. But this year it's going to be big. There's a public holiday and there's a massive recognition of this, and you'll have the whole nation looking up at the dawn night sky to see Matariki. There are lots of events being planned. So that's going to be a great awareness raiser right across people for different reasons. So for us, for the dark sky movement, it's a major thing, because once people realize the value of the night skies, the fact that they can see it and the risk of it being lost, we can leverage on that to sort of advocate for more. That's it.
That is pretty much bang on time too. So I don't know how you managed that. It was magnificent. Thank you very, very much. I can't believe you're getting a national holiday to look up at the skies. We are very, very jealous here in Australia, I can tell you. There's been a couple of questions come through, and both of them good ones. So the first one we've got here, Nalayini, is what specific items would you want in an outdoor lighting legislation in the country?
Say that again.
So what specific items would you want out of outdoor lighting legislation? So if you were to get outdoor lighting legislation in New Zealand, what would you be specifically looking for in that legislation?
That is not my area of expertise, but basically, I'll just give you some examples of bad outdoor lighting that needs control. So there are sporting fields where they can have really bright lights to have night games. That's fine. But after the game is over, those lights should be switched off, but they can be left on all night. So the thing about controlling light pollution is not to switch off the functionality of light, but to limit it to the need only. So Waiheke is a good example. They want to become a dark sky park, but the sporting lights are left on all night. So we would say we will set some time limits. We'll say it must go off at some kind of a curfew, lighting curfew. You can have it on, but by 11 o'clock at night or whatever. One of the things that's happened in Auckland is we have switched to LED lights. But each of the light, if we want to, can be individually controlled. Not that we control it individually. And over the last few years, I've developed a good relationship with Auckland Transport. So if there's an event going on, they will actually turn down the lights for us in that area, which is a big privilege. But in Auckland, the lights are dimmed around 11 p.m. and then brightened up again in the 5 a.m. or 6 a.m. or whatever. And then residential homes, again, we can't have too many controls there. We are encouraging them to control, it's self-control. So we show the benefits of controlling light pollution and encourage them to control. But in Waiheke, the legislation is actually setting some standards as to what they can and can't do. So it's as I said, I'm not the expert, but when we, the way we do the ordinance is we take a standard that's working in another dark sky place that another region has approved. Then you study the needs of your area. So you do a drive-through, look at the lighting inventory, where's the pollution coming from currently, and potentially where it can come from. And then you you consult the people and put in some rules that are, that doesn't cut back the functionality and cuts out the light, and shielding lights, time sensors, that type of thing.
Yep, I think that answers that pretty well. Look, I'm going to jump to this next one. And by the way, there's some fantastic comments on how much people enjoyed your talk in the chat, which is, I will second that motion as well. But just because I'm interested as well, Bridget Farnworth has asked, will there be a Starlight conference to be held in 2022?
Say that again, 20?
Will there be a Starlight conference being held in 2022?
Oh, that's an interesting question. It's what I learned. That was my first organizing of a conference, but for Professor John Hearnshaw, it was his 20-something, but it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work, lot of whatever. And the pandemic has put paid to conference. But what we did do, which I didn't mention, is after the Starlight conference in 2019. It's important to meet in person as well. So last year, there was a Royal Astronomical Society annual conference in Wellington. And following that conference, we had a half-a-day workshop. So that was a dark sky workshop. It was focused on dark sky. So people attended it because they're interested in dark skies, but other people who were at the conference also came along. I think this is Australia's turn, Landon.
Well, I prefer a holiday in New Zealand, but okay, you've dodged that question. Okay, so we're going to say no to 2022 and put you down for 2023. I think.
Okay.
So, another question's come here from Anonymous. Has New Zealand considered adding dark skies as part of the World Heritage values at New Zealand World Heritage sites?
You'll have to repeat that. I'm not hearing this clearly.
So has New Zealand considered adding dark sky as part of World Heritage values at World Heritage sites in New Zealand?
All I know is Tekapo tried to pursue that heritage status as well, and that has been very hard to get. So I'm aware of that. And I don't know. Steve, do you know whether we have World Heritage sites that are considering dark skies? I can talk about Fiordland National Park. That's a World Heritage site, right? Now they're pursuing dark sky accreditation for Fiordland National Park. But it's not add-on so much as independent accreditation. But that's a good thought. Maybe that's what we should do. I'm making a note, whoever the person who asked the question, I'm making a note for Dark Sky Network to get a list of World Heritage sites and pursue that.
No, we've actually looked at that in Tasmania, and the big issue we've had here is actually ownership of the land. So whilst the site is World Heritage sites, there's generally multifaceted owners, and here in Tasmania, it's been very difficult.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things we did try also at the Starlight conference was to get the Department of Conservation land to be, controlled, because they own quite a lot of land right across the country. They've got land. Every dark sky place will have some Department of Conservation land. And as a concept, they were positive. They have supported each dark sky place with support letters. But to actually make it happen, I mean, to be honest, we haven't pursued it strongly as well, because the pandemic has a lot of responsibility to take here. But I can tell you one thing we did. We did say last year, 2020, we had the Royal Astronomical Society calendars. So these calendars were sent to every member of parliament in New Zealand. And one of the parties discussed dark skies and, whatever at their conference or their whatever, and they were sort of positive to support it. But unfortunately, it was the wrong party. They're the right-wing party, and I think they probably liked it for astrotourism. We were hoping the Green Party would pick it up, But we had about 10 different or 15 different MPs write in support. Again, it's something we haven't pursued.
I'll jump in on that one because astrotourism does interest me because I think it is a key driver for change. Has there been with Mackenzie, like we saw the huge number up to 900,000 guest nights from, double since 2014 to 2019. Has there been any research on the economic benefits or the economic spend versus the average spend of a tourist versus, say, an astro tourist?
There are numbers. There have been studies done. There are numbers. I don't have them.
I'll contact you later for those.
There are numbers, and there are special studies done. I can talk about Great Barrier Island. This is an island that's a little bit of a sleepy island, and that has come to life. And people come. There are people writing from overseas, booking a sort of astrotourism night or whatever before they book the flight to New Zealand. So it does catch. What helped them? That's the other thing. You've got to market yourself. So this is again where international accreditation helps. So what Great Barrier Island did was they managed to get an article in the Singapore Airlines in-flight magazine. Because I was flying back from London, I picked up the magazine from the pocket and I thought, it was the cover page. I thought, I can recognize this picture. And then I flicked inside, there was me mentioned and pictures and whatever. So some of these things don't just happen, it needs to be promoted. So Tekapo is now established. So any site on what do you do in New Zealand will mention Tekapo, and the newer ones have to promote themselves. So Great Barrier Island did a good job of promoting themselves. Stewart Island hasn't done quite a good job. The other part of astrotourism, Landon, is because I have this dual I have a degree in economics, finance, and astronomy. I have that dual understanding. So when Great Barrier Island was getting accredited, there wasn't anyone on the island who could, who understood the night sky, how to interpret it or anything. So in advance of that, I said they need to train up some people as dark sky ambassadors. So we ran a course for 25 people, and none of them had any astronomical background. We trained them up over a 3-day period. And so it was done for free. The local board did it for free. We did our inputs pro bono. And out of that, there have been 4 astrotourism businesses that have come out. And one of them is greatly successful. And it's like a cottage industry. And so it's same thing with Stewart Island. They were not getting any benefit. So they contacted us and said, can you come over and run a dark sky ambassadors course? And it's now produced 3 astrotourism businesses from zero. And that was, over the last 18 months. So that's the other part of it. You can't just have a dark sky accreditation and expect astrotourism to happen. You need to have people who are trained up to do that, but it's not hard. We are not converting them to astrophysicists or experienced astronomers, just enough to show a peep into the universe by visitors, and then some marketing promotion.
Steve's just shared a link for us actually there in the chat. So I'm assuming that's values are included in the AMIDS annual reports to the IDA.
Yeah.
And I can see Caesar's certainly keen to see economic benefits as well. So I'm sure he'll be clicking the same link as I've just clicked, and anyone else that wants to click on that link and look into it, because I think it's certainly a key for people in power. I think. And we know that it is good rural tourism, and it's also off-peak tourism. It makes a lot of sense.
Shoulder season, yeah.
Well, Nalayini, I think that's the end of the questions we have in the Q&A section. I've just been blown away tonight, so I can't thank you enough for your time. I can't thank everyone else out there in webinar land as well for tuning in. As we say, this is pretty much part of what ADSA is all about, the sharing of knowledge, and so for you guys to log in, really appreciate it. Of course, Marnie will shoot me if I don't mention the fact that we are a not-for-profit organisation, and this is, of course, a free webinar. So if anyone feels the need, please do log on to our Australasian Dark Sky Alliance.org and feel free to donate to the organisation. But I think on behalf of everyone, I thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Have a good night, everybody.